It seems logical that space and space projects have strong collaborations behind them. It seems logical because the projects are so complex and they're so big often. But it's actually not always the case. And building partnerships in the space industry can actually sometimes be quite challenging because of geopolitics, because of commercial interests, IP-related stuff, legal stuff, defense-related stuff even. All that just becomes roadblocks in the collaboration and partnerships in the space industry. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Allies in Innovation. My name is Mikkel Svold. And on a video link, we have with us Kartik Kumar, who is the CEO of satsearch, which is an online marketplace for space products and services. And we also have Manfred Otto, who is the Senior Director in the Space Department at Terma, or one of the Senior Directors, that is. I don't know, Kartik, maybe you could start this one off. What do you observe? What are the biggest challenges that you observe in the space market when we talk collaboration and partnerships? You sit outside of the actual production market. So what do you observe?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to this podcast. I think, as a marketplace, we have the vantage point of watching a lot of companies collaborate and compete. And there's a couple of things that, stand in the way, I think, of what people assume de facto the case in the space industry. A lot of people think of projects like the International Space Station and the amount of collaboration between different countries and assume that that is the status quo across the industry. But as you mentioned in your intro, the finer details sort of dictate how easy or difficult it is to collaborate. Particularly when it comes to cross-border collaboration, we see that the way that people treat their technology, their marketing and business development strategies, restrictions that might be in place due to export control and other legal aspects, all make it more complicated than you would assume is, the obvious fact that people collaborate. And the other piece of this is that your collaborator today could be your competitor tomorrow, which means that there is some level of medium and long-term thinking required to determine who are the parties you're going to collaborate with, how are you going to go to market with them. And what's interesting in the space market today is that it's sort of the moment in which, from the commercialization point of view, this is being figured out. So it's the time to be in the arena. It's when everything is sort of being fleshed out. And that makes it an exciting time for the industry.
And Manfred, you are in the arena. How do you see this?
Basically, what Kartik said, I fully I fully agree to that. Yeah, when you talk about obstacles in space, yeah, of course there's a lot of complexity along the value chain. Yeah, think about the production of a satellite, the design of a satellite, the operations of the satellite, etc., etc., etc. With all the technology challenges, legal challenges, commercial challenges, whatever you had, I think the most challenging obstacle is to orchestrate all this complexity. Mm. That's what I basically observe. And Kartik, as you mentioned, yeah. So we as a company, yeah, we are working with competitors on certain missions, yeah, very closely. On one side, yeah, and on the other side, we are really in a very, very big and hard competitions with them. Yeah, that's the way it works currently.
Mm. And Kartik, you mentioned the cross-border collaboration makes it even harder. Is that only when we talk Europe, the US, or Europe, China, or outside of the Eurozone or outside of Europe, or is it also when we are on ESA missions or when we are on commercial missions that, regular satellite missions that are based in Europe mainly?
I mean, it's really at the smallest and the largest level. So yeah, if you take the ISS at the largest scale, it's many countries collaborating together and then making a commitment to fund this project, and that trickling down into industry and a whole bunch of different actors participating. But if you're even bilaterally, right, if you have a certain organization in country A and another organization in country B, and they have found that it makes sense to do business, whether it is to collaborate, whether it is from one to buy from the other, just navigating even the minutia of licensing, of export control, of customs clearance. These are not trivial, often also because in the space industry, you're talking about technologies that are classified as dual use. And what that means is take something like a battery, right? A standard regular battery that is qualified for space use could be considered dual use if it has specific applications within, for instance, the defense domain. That mean that if it was a consumer product, you would get it from A to B much easier than if you're doing it within the space sector. So you need that level of expertise and knowledge, which ultimately also leads to time and cost, right? And that makes these collaborations hard. And I would say, of course, there's aspects of this and pockets of it that have been streamlined. But the reason why we're still talking about this as being worked on or solved is also because the spectrum of space projects has drastically increased over the last 2 decades, going from your classical ESA missions, flagship missions, to government projects, to now straight up commercial ventures that are being backed by private capital. How do you, in that environment, make sure that these kinds of transactions run seamlessly? There's really lots of challenges still to overcome.
Mm. And Manfred, when we look over the years, because Terma has been involved in space technology for a long time, and you have as well, also before you were at Terma. How do you see the transition from, I was just about to say, before the commercialization began of space to now, where I don't know if we can say that it's already commercialized or are we kind of midway?
Yeah, I think we are very close to commercialization currently. But of course, when you look back over the last decades, what happened? It was quite regulated. Space was very much regulated, driven by space agencies like ESA, for example, driven by geo-return policies. Yeah. But I think this way of collaboration is now dramatically changing, as there are more and more new companies entering the space markets, as new technologies are positioned into the space industry. Think about technologies like cybersecurity technologies. Think about cloud technologies. Think about artificial intelligence. Yeah, these are all topics that are now pushed into the space. Yeah, because space has realized, the space industry, that they can benefit a lot of this. Yeah, think about AI, automation of operation to operate a satellite. Yeah. Or to process the data, the massive amount of data that are generated, during a satellite mission, for example, And I think the borders between, I wouldn't say I don't like the terminology that you have two worlds of space. I think it's now coming into a, let's say, closed ecosystem where private space, commercial space is benefiting also a lot of institutional space and vice versa. Mm. It remembers me a little bit on the old days in telecommunication. You remember the early 2000 years, when all the telecommunication networks were migrated to IP-based networks. Mm. And all this internet stuff, all this mobile communication came on top of the network infrastructure. This was a huge boost in the industry. New business models were created in those days, and it feels a little bit the same, as it was 20 years ago in the mobile communication industry.
Mm. Mm. And you mentioned that you see a lot of smaller companies, or newer companies at least, coming into the space. But can you, as a small company, manage and kind of find your way through all of this complexity? You mentioned the technology complexities, the legal stuff, the commercial stuff. It seems to me that there's so much complexity that it doesn't really allow for newcomers, but you say the opposite, Manfred. I don't know, Kartik, what do you see?
I mean, this is, I think, traditionally been the problem for space as well, is that the barriers to entry to the market have been very high. And in some sense, the established players were incentivized to keep it that way, right? Because as long as the market stays a closed system, there aren't new entrants, you don't really have much threat coming at you. There are a number of things that happened, starting with on the technology side. So the advent of these small satellites, nanosatellites, made it just purely from a cost point of view viable for more companies to think about putting assets in space. And so then you have like a technology trend that has reduced the barrier to entry. Then you had people develop business models on top of this. And then we saw as a result of that, the capital holders, the investors in the private market seeing opportunity to potentially earn, ROI off of that and funding a number of these companies. So suddenly you've seen, an increase in the amount of capital flowing into the market, private capital flowing into the market, which also reduces, what was traditionally a big barrier in the market. And then finally, on the licensing side of things, it's sort of a double-edged sword because you've seen certain alliances form backed by essentially geopolitical trends, which means that within certain regions of the world, between certain actors, it's become easier. It's potentially become harder to then deal with the other parts of the world. But even just, for instance, looking at Europe and looking particularly at the ESA member states, there are certain provisions that allow you then to come into the market. And if you're, for instance, I'm based in the Netherlands, if you're a Dutch company and you set up here to sell your products or services into Germany or in France or elsewhere. So these things have all come together to mean that we are seeing steadily the barriers to access to the industry dropping, which is where this thrust for potential commercialization comes from as well.
How small is small? Is it possible to be like a 5-man team to do something?
Be a 1-person team in your garage.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you can think about, for a budget of less than 100,000 euros, getting a satellite in orbit today.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
It's not pocket change, but it's something that's more accessible than, 100 million.
It's something that a private person with a normal income would be able to kind of like, save money and then use the pension. And then,
I mean, if you want to put like a really, really dumb satellite in space, you could do it for as low as like $5,000. It doesn't do very much then in space. And it probably
but then you have a satellite.
But you have a satellite just with a beacon that's just flashing every so often.
And you get to name the satellite also, right? And then that satellite will then be on the sat maps. I want to do that.
So I'm based in Vienna, and there's in Austria there is a space cluster, and we are quite good collaborating with universities, for example, with the Technical University in Graz and in Wien. And those guys, they are building satellites. They are building nanosatellites. As part of their PhD program, for example, or as part of their master program. So it's really, really, let's say, a broad range, of potential company sizes. Starting with, let's say, a team at the university. Up to several hundreds of engineers working on complex power distribution systems, for example. It's a very broad range.
Okay. We still have some obstacles to talk about. We talk about technical or technology complexities in the partnerships, but also the commercial complexities and legal complexities. I'm interested in especially the legal and the IP complexities. How do you navigate those? Manfred, I don't know if you have any experience in that.
I think one critical topic is always the export control. It's not a problem when you are dealing with projects within the European Union. So this is quite easy. It's normal stuff. But whenever you look across across Europe, then it becomes critical. Because Kartik, you mentioned dual use. This is quite a huge effort. Then internally also to check all the compliance, to check all the regulations, exporting your solutions, your products to other out of Europe. That's always quite a challenge. You can violate a lot of rules, so you really have to take care of that. So
And
we are really running a dedicated, more than less a dedicated team, dealing with export control, compliance topics, which is really critical.
And if you are a smaller, newer company coming into the space market, how do you actually do that? Is it even possible?
Well, most countries have a regulator, so a government body authority that is intended to be there to enable business to happen. So they are usually the first stop. Companies go to these authorities, essentially get the rule book and an explanation, or maybe even an interpretation of the rule book in their specific case. The authority, I think, will only go so far. So often that then means it's coupled with companies having to hire people who have this expertise. For small companies, it might be on a consulting basis, right? Somebody who helps them with very specific filings, with an understanding of how to classify their technology, etc. And then the larger a company gets, and the more critical this becomes, they bring somebody like this on staff. But it immediately demonstrates also why building something in space, and I wouldn't say space is that unique, because if you were to build a medical device or something else, you similarly are under a lot of regulatory scrutiny. And what that implies is you have higher capital requirements, because your capital requirements are not then just for the fact that you have to set up a factory and you have to buy materials. You have to get this expertise as well. And this expertise generally doesn't come cheap. And it's actually sometimes even rare, right, to find somebody who's super well versed in all the rules and knows exactly how to execute a project like this from the legal perspective. So this is what goes into your business plan. You have to say, hey, I also need a compliance officer that is adept at understanding what my technology set, needs. And you put that as part of your de-risking plan. So you will see that often small companies, whether they know it in the beginning or not, they will very quickly figure out that the only way they'll get their technology, their product, their service, and this is particularly in hardware products, I would say. Software has some aspects of this, and then services, it's even fuzzier. But really with physical hardware, it's tangible, and you can think of, okay, to get this thing from my desk into space, what is the path I'm going to have to take? And one of those is, as a parallel path to technology development, to capital raising, is just simply legal compliance and regulatory.
I think this is really one very serious obstacle, what you mentioned, Kartik, just think about space. In space, you need innovations. You need to go ahead with your technical innovations as a company. You need to go to the market with your new innovations. You also have to maintain in your company, in your R&D team, an atmosphere that stimulates technology development. And we all need new technology to come down with the costs, to ensure safety, to be more efficient, more flexible, etc., etc. We all know this. But sometimes I have the observation that whenever something comes up, I have an idea. This could be a massive innovation in space. You talk with your colleagues on the floor, having a coffee, and a lot of creative ideas come up. But it's a long way. It's a long way from the idea to a product. Because you have to deal with all that legal constraints. Export stuff. A lot of paperwork has to be done. I observed it in my life, independently if this is space or any other industry. This is sometimes really burying an innovation.
And is it necessary then?
I think that's the question, right? Some people would say regulating, and we need to, in fact, deregulate, which seems to be a trend in certain parts of the world, right? To deregulate, to enable business to thrive and have innovation. And on the other side, people say, look, there's all these externalities, right? You could go and create this innovation. You create the side effect that creates a downside for society, and the business, the entrepreneur, is not paying for it. So who pays for that then? And if society has to pay for that, then society should have a say in, whether this is allowed and under what terms. So I think this is maybe one of the hardest conversations, in fact, of the day right now. Should we be regulating? What should we be regulating? When should we be regulating? Where? It's not a simple topic, I think.
I don't know how do you meet the regulatory body, Manfred, in the innovations that you at Terma come up with? Is it something that's ongoing, or is it at the beginning of a project, or how is it?
It's let's say it's an ongoing process. Yeah, it's part of our R&D process. It's part of our offer process. So it's really in our DNA. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have our internal processes, and as I mentioned, all the support, central functions that are supporting us to do the right steps at the right time. Yeah, that's basically very well set up. Otherwise, it would be nearly impossible I would say, to handle this, efficiently.
Yeah. You mentioned in the beginning that you have you mentioned some of the commercial complexities. The fact that you'd have to sometimes closely collaborate with direct competitors, and in some parts, and then other parts you are actually, in fact, diehard competitors. How do you navigate that, and what kind of complexities has that given? Do you have any examples of a situation?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Let's talk about, let's say, our European space missions, ESA missions, where you have geo-return basically, and finally space. Yeah, it's also a kind of community. You know all all the companies. You know all the partners. What you have, what they are doing. You know their products. Yeah. And basically, if it comes to a mission where I say, okay, it would be great, to do something out of Austria, but we could complement it with something from the Netherlands, for example, So also to satisfy some geo-return policies, so that we optimize our chances, to provide an offer, that fits to the customer needs, not only from a technical side, but also from a programmatic side, I think every company we are working with is very open to that. Yeah. So sometimes we are addressing those companies. Sometimes we are addressed by these competitors. Yeah. That's a very good relationship on one side. Yeah. But on the other side, okay, it can happen. Yeah. That we are in a strong competition and we have to fight for the project against each other. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. As long as we do it in a fair way.
Yeah, because that's one of the questions is, what if then you are a smaller player up against a larger competitor? Is it possible to have a fair game, so to say?
Of course, I think you have to play fair, because on one side, as I mentioned, you are in a competition, and on the other side, you're in a collaboration. When this is a prerequisite. Being fair, there's no way not being fair. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've talked about some of the complexities that are now. When we look ahead, what do you see of changes in the space environment, in the way to do business for space projects? Do you see it becoming harder or easier to build collaboration, build partnerships, build for space? Kartik, what do you see?
Yeah, so I mean, there's one aspect of the challenges that we didn't talk about so far, and I think it's with reason, because in some sense it has been we've been delaying having to address that, and that is what is happening at the end of the value chain. So for sustainable business, sustainable commercial business, what you really want to address is who is the paying customer at the end of that value chain. Mm-hmm. What value are they getting? What price are they willing to pay? Because in essence, the entire economics of the ecosystem that is attached to that is governed by that. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen over the last decade or so, and what we see even on satsearch, is that there are a lot of companies that have presumptive markets, which means that they have been funded to go out and build in these nascent markets where demand is not very well characterized yet. Take, for instance, the lunar economy. We can presume 50 years from now, 100 years from now, there might be a thriving lunar economy. Mm-hmm. And yet today, we don't really have a sense of who is the paying customer. We have a few examples of organizations that are kickstarting that demand, whether it be a NASA or an ESA or even a defense department. But there's nothing close to a thriving, sustainable commercial lunar ecosystem. So then you look at how many companies have been funded to build landers, to build launch vehicles that can deliver mass on the moon, who have, in situ resource technologies, communication networks on the moon. You have to ask the question, when is all of that going to get sorted out? Like what demand will actually turn up, and who will survive that, and who will not, as a result of realizing they built for the wrong customer, or the customer they built for wasn't there, or the customer they built for didn't have the money that they presume. And I think that that's what the big reckoning is for the space industry in the next decade, maybe up to 2 decades, is that all this exuberance around commercial space and where there is money to be made, quite frankly, will meet reality. And through that, we will see, through normal market mechanisms, basically winners and losers. And so the big challenge, and what we are seeing, is lots and lots of teams trying to understand, what does the future actually look like? And predicting the future is, that thing that everyone would love to do.
Notoriously hard.
And notoriously hard, exactly. So how do you do that? Well, you can develop best practices around how you look at trend data, market data, analyze stuff. But that's a competence that we're seeing that a lot of companies now are recognizing is important for them to be able to make the right moves moving forward. And their repeated ability then to attract capital, to attract talent, to move forward is fulfilled by that cycle being closed. As in, if you can make a step in that direction and prove that some fraction of your business model is viable, well, then you get to put down your flag metaphorically and say, hey, we've reached this point, attract more capital, attract more talent for the next step. But yeah, if I have to give an analogy, I sort of feel like we're in the Wild West at the moment. Everyone believes that there is gold to be found. The question is, who's going to find it and where are they going to find it? And out of even the gold rush, there were winners and losers, right? There were people who mortgaged everything they had and lost everything they had, and the others who made a fortune that will last generations. And I think space is in that position right now.
Okay. And then where is the gold?
That's the thing. Like if you
heard
could
it here first.
If you could build a time machine, go into the future, find that out and come back today, you have a straight path to becoming a very successful entrepreneur. So I think that's the thing, right? And that's the excitement and the uncertainty and the difficulty of building in nascent markets. In well-established markets, demand is quantified. And then what you're basically trying to do is to build a better mousetrap to capture that demand. But in a market like space, demand, it's not just supply, meaning technology developing, it's demand developing as well. The demand is in and of itself different from 10 years ago in the market.
We've seen that before in many markets, including, of course, the most obvious one, the iPhone introduced to no customers, or with no customers needing it. And now, who doesn't own a smartphone?
And you had a whole app ecosystem that is worth, trillions of dollars, I think, by now, that developed out of that. So it served as a platform as well for further growth and further economic development. So space, I think, is in that place, which is why it's so exciting, because you step into the arena now and the person next to you might claim they know the future to your right, and the person to the left might claim they know the future. And the truth of the matter is none of you know the future. You're all there because the future is unwritten in that sense.
I think, Kartik, that's a very, very good example, what you mentioned with the iPhone. Yeah. I remember in the 90s of the last century, I was one of the first there buying a mobile phone, and I received a call. And all those guys around me, I don't need this stuff, but this is useless, completely useless. And see how this technology has changed our daily life. Yeah. And as you said, it's very hard to predict where the journey goes in the future. So a time machine for traveling 20 years into the future would be very, very good, but we all don't know it. Yeah. And you're right. Yeah. It's about creation of demand. Yeah. Fully understand, fully agree on that. Yeah. But, I wouldn't say, as you mentioned, what is it becoming harder? Is it becoming easier? I don't like the word harder. Yeah, of course it's becoming complex. Yeah, I think everyone needs to be creative, needs to act agile, yeah, because now new players are entering the markets. A lot of ideas are popping up, yeah. Not a lot of new business models are created, yeah. And I think it's a very, very good and promising challenge, yeah, to play a role in that market for the future. And this is a huge motivation, yeah, I think for everyone who is working in space.
And this is, of course, also connected to the fact that we see the commercialization of space.
Yeah.
What kind of partnerships and what kind of developments do you see in the service offering to the new space industry or era?
So do you mean like what the trends are currently, or what sort of the gaps are?
No, I mean, connected with the commercialization, what does that drive? Does that drive cheaper products? Does it drive more collaboration? Likewise, bundling of products or services. What do you foresee?
Well, I think there's a very good example in this light that is spoken about in space as though it exists today already. But I can tell you from the daily work that we're doing, it is partly in place, but largely aspirational. And that is this concept of commercial off the shelf, right? So when you buy something on an e-commerce website as a consumer, you buy what exists in principle already that you can have delivered on your doorstep tomorrow morning. In that, you have transparency about, what it looks like, how big it is, how heavy it is, how much it costs, etc. And you pick based on what's the offering on the market that fits your budget, fits your specifications. In space, it's not really like that. We talk about commercial off the shelf in the same way, as though it is a thing, as though if I need a reaction wheel or a thruster or a battery or whatever it is, that I can go and pick it off the shelf and it is there. And yet the reality is that is aspirational. Companies are looking at standardizing around that, but standardization is a topic in many industries that has posed difficulty because you don't want to standardize around the wrong standard, right? You don't want to be on the wrong side of history. You want to be on the right side of history, which turns out to be the prevailing standard that leads industry forward and allows things like scalability, cost to be amortized and reduced ultimately, and also risk to be spread. But what is going to get standardized? And standardization comes with it in the short term a threat, because when you standardize, especially if it's open standards, you end up with effectively commoditizing part of the market, which means your margins on a per unit basis of whatever you're selling typically also decrease. So there's a natural incentive to say, no, I have this unique thing. It is not going to be commoditized because it affects your balance sheet. But in the long run, if you want to scale and sell 100x, 1000x, 10,000x of those units, it's unavoidable, right? Because there are certain natural requirements if you want to scale. So I think this whole commercialization trend is like very difficult because that part of it is highly unpredictable. What standards are actually going to prevail? We had an example of this with the CubeSat standard coming out of the academic environment and then getting adopted by commercial enterprise and even governments. But that now needs to be reinvented because we're going to a different form factor of satellite, different types of payloads, different requirements. And we've dealt with quite a few companies that are very happy to standardize inside their own organization because then they can build process efficiencies, cost efficiencies, time efficiencies.
Also, that matches their specific workflow. Also,
but they want to build a walled garden. They don't want their neighbor having exactly the same proprietary technology and IP or access to the ability to do that. So, how do you get these organizations to sit at a table and come together around a common set of standards? Well, the space agencies have done things like this. ESA has a set of standards. NASA has a set of standards, but they are all architected around the needs of the traditional flagship missions, large institutional missions. And they're trying, I know, towards on the small satellite side and the commercial side to go with the market. It's just the market's going at a speed that is 10x, 100x faster than anybody can keep up with.
But Manfred, how do you then create the USB-C version for space? How do you create something that is universal, this is how we do it?
That's a very good question. Just coming back to Kartik, I think at least for mid-term, if you look into, let's say, not long-term, mid-term perspective, I think space urgently has to look into standardization, into a platform-based approach. I think there's something is going on already. Also going into software-defined solutions like the software-defined satellite, standardized platforms, standardized payloads. So it's a very kind of modular approach, where you can compile your spacecraft, and design your mission based on existing commodity products, And I'm still sure that there's still something there for solutioning, for customizations, for adaptations, coming back to us, of course, when we are building up a product, normally you have a bunch of regulations, basically ESA standards, which you have to fulfill because we are doing a lot of ESA projects, for example, And then, of course, when there are some changes in interfaces, then we are evolving our products continuously, and bringing that as a product feature on board. That's basically how to handle this. So we start with a kind of minimum of set what is necessary for our customers, based, for example, on ESA standards, as you mentioned, and then of course adapting our products accordingly, stepwise approach.
But then, Manfred, there's always, I'm sorry, just to interject, there's always a risk calculation, right? Because which of those trends do you believe in, substantiates investing in now that it will sustain, and which one of them will die out? That's always a looking glass problem. You have to kind of have enough expertise and intuition to say, okay, this is the one that makes sense for us to build into our product.
Exactly. It's a decision. It's a product management decision,
I think actually this actually talks into maybe the issues related to being a small company versus being an established bigger company in this market. Because if you're one of the established ones, you come from this notion of every single product for space is unique. It has a lot of financial funding because it's a government, it's an ESA project, whatever, something like that. And then you kind of have to turn the ship. You have to turn the cruiser into something that is more fast-paced. Whereas if you are a small, newer company, you may be born like that. So that also sets requirements for, a company like Terma and of course all of the other companies or the established companies in the space sector.
And I mean, the financial industry has a way for these worlds to meet, right? So traditional merger and acquisitions is a way that these small companies that bring these fast innovations into the market can become well capitalized by a larger company that says, hey, this is in our strategic interest long term. And I think that's in the stars for the space industry, that we'll see many more of the larger companies teaming with the small companies. And you could get partnership and collaboration, not just from the perspective of like an MOU or like an actual external collaboration between parties, but just through acquisition. A small company could get bought up by the big company and pulled into their long-term strategic initiatives.
Yeah, and then also secure their funding that way.
Yeah, and it's healthy for the ecosystem. You have shareholders who get an exit potentially that way. And that technology has a chance then to be refined and to scale because you've got capital backing it. That means that instead of just being able to build 2 or 3 prototype units that went into space, now you have an engine behind you that can build 100 of these every month.
Just a very last question before our time is up. What's the next step in space right now?
That's I think a difficult question simply because there's many steps in my mind.
Very difficult.
I think the one key thing is I think we're on a good path of reducing barriers to access to this market, and that should be continued with real enthusiasm and energy. We need to continue to break down those barriers and bring more people into the sector, because I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of seeing, more use cases, more value being validated, more talent coming into the industry if we just reduce those barriers. So it feels to me like the bottom line to everything is like make space super accessible for anybody and make it a normal career for a person to consider, right? As much as you might think of an job in the finance industry or in the classical tech industry, I think space should enter into that conversation as just a normal job, right? A normal industry to be a part of.
Yeah. So we should all encourage our children to want to be an astronaut, and then maybe not all of them can become astronauts, but they can all become engineers in.
But that's what I mean. You no longer have to go after the jobs that are so rare, right? You could just become a mechanical or electronics engineer working for a company that is building a satellite that is doing methane observations for climate change monitoring or whatever.
Manfred,
and that becomes
Manfred,
a job.
Is it the same thing that you're seeing, Manfred?
I think one of the most challenges is talent acquisition, because you need all this broad ecosystem of knowledge, legal stuff, commercial stuff, and especially engineering competences, technology. For developing new technologies, you need engineers, you need creative engineers, you need to attract those engineers, and as you say, as Kartik says, space is now becoming more and more, let's call it popular, and we have to work into that direction, because it is accessible more or less for everyone, space, and I think this is I'm very optimistic, when I look into the future of space, on our industry.
I think let those be the last words, and then let's encourage our kids to look at the stars just once more before it all light pollutes away from us.
That's what I always do.
Yeah, exactly. Manfred Otto and Kartik Kumar, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. And to you guys out there listening, if you have any questions, please do reach out on podcast@terma.com. And that was podcast@terma.com. And of course, if you like this episode, share it with your friends and your colleagues or whoever you think might find this episode and this podcast interesting. I think that's all that we will talk about today. And what's left to say is just thank you so much for listening.